the fault-finding mind is very normal, very common, very vulgar. And it's just the way that we're built. There's this problem, and you go from problem to problem to problem to problem to problem. And then when you get done with that problem, you start looking for problems. And now we've got TVs, so you can look the entire world over for problems. In fact, that's usually what the news is about. It's like, where are there problems in the world today? Here we go. Turn on the news, you're going to find out where there are problems. What's happening in Bangladesh right now? Let's zoom in with the helicopter, shall we? Look at these people burning down houses and blasting. Or here's this ship that's been sailing the seas for decades, but the first time you hear about it is that it's about to sink, or it ran aground, or got hijacked, or this is a whole reason for news, you see. It's a bad thing, so it's worth mentioning. So, but is it really? And we're naturally curious animals, and it's really great to see animals when they get curious about things. Like a bear that comes across a tennis ball will stop, sniff it, sort of hit it with its paw. It's some type of object that it doesn't or hasn't encountered very often in its travels. And so there's a curious interaction with it. That's also a part of it. It's just basic curiosity. But what does fault finding do? Well, you find the faults. And finding fault after fault after fault after fault after fault after fault is a recipe for dissatisfaction, period. Because it doesn't matter even if you're Superman. All of the problems in the world, you can't solve them. So if you have really high standards, you think that's also a valuable thing, to have really high standards. Your inability to solve all the problems in the world, combined with those high standards, is another recipe for extreme levels of dissatisfaction. It's aggravated by the amount of effort you put into it. Put in all this effort to solve all the problems of the world, or at least the biggest ones. And finally, it wasn't possible. Right? Last year's birthday cake wasn't good enough, so you really baked an amazing birthday cake, and there were still 3 people that did complain because they didn't like the chocolate mousse icing. They wanted vanilla instead. And so they took it to their mouth, they tasted one time, and then they spit it out and went, "Ew," and start crying. So all that work you put into it, well, it wasn't reciprocated. You can't be outcome dependent. You can't know the outcome. The next day, maybe it was just a taste thing. Like the next day, they want the chocolate thing, but not the vanilla thing. So you made them vanilla cake, but then they want the chocolate cake. So this is the definition of unskillfulness. You can see it in children, and you can see it's natural. And you can also see how unskillful it is. And it does cause unnecessary suffering. Just loads and loads and loads of it. Unless you make an intervention and say, wait, what am I thinking about here again? What am I doing again? Am I looking for faults that I will find that I cannot solve and experience the suffering of that? Is that wise? Is that process wise? Even if it's normal, is it wise? And if it's not wise, can we move a little bit more into super normal realms by doing some crazy things like just dropping it, catching yourself doing something and stopping it? Why do people not pick their nose in public? Because they can catch themselves doing it. They have a little bit more self-awareness. Now, some people don't. Children don't. The older you get, you can. But you should be that an adult for yourself, for your own thoughts. Don't put up with bad behavior by yourself. And you don't have to. This is one place where you can exercise authority and say, look, I'm not thinking about that. I'm not indulging in that. I'm not getting into the samsaras of circular ways of engaging in dissatisfaction machines. And it is volitional. And you can have all these terrible, horrible people trying to create a social narrative and social conditions and social rules, and you still don't have to criticize them. Right? When you open the door and a puff of smoke hits you in the face that day because somebody set something on fire, that you didn't have any control over that. You couldn't have prevented that. If you could have, you would have. There it is. This is Monday morning again. And this is out of controlness again, and this is impermanence again. So this too shall pass. So there's the smoke cloud. Here's your feet walking. You can close your eyes. You don't have to breathe in too much. You hold your breath. You're past the smoke cloud, and it's on to the next potentiality for good things. So good things, why do we value them so much? Because they're sometimes, in many cases, rare, or let's say the perception of them are rare. It's not that they're not there. It's just that you don't see them. Your focus is on the bad things. Well, there's the causality. Focusing on the bad, you're generating the bad. It's creating a bad causality. You're thinking about irritating things. You're thinking about outrageous things. Well, the causality will be outrage. So, although very many minds can be driven astray, although very many minds go astray, you can find your mind again and make it a mind of compassion. Firstly, towards yourself. That is the compassionate way. It's taking your mind, calming it down. Right? The horse is flipping out in the stall. It's time to calm it down. It's not time to take out the whip. But that we also get into that type of mindset as well. You've seen it before. People, the horse is acting up. Well, what comes out? The whip comes out. Well, does the whip help the horse? In many cases, it doesn't. So you're whipping a horse that's already acting up. And so you're adding unskillful behavior on top of unskillful behavior. That's not the way. You got to calm the horse down before you can ride it in a calm way. So focus on calming down. Focus on breathing. Your mind needs to go somewhere. Put it on the breath. Breathe in, breathe out, and just stick with it as long as you can. The circumstances might force you to interact in some way, but then do it with neutrality and get back to the breath. And you don't have to transmit it to an outrageous group engaging in outrageous things or interacting with them. You're there in the group, but you're not of the group. You're not part of the group. You're not part of their thoughts, their ideas, their trolling, their malign influence. And as soon as you can be away from the group, then you have that less of an influence, a negative influence on your mind. But when they're in your vicinity, you can relegate what influence they have potentially to zero if you are skillful. Just sounds and forms. That's it. Here's a form. Think of yourself in a dream, a daydream. Because it's really the same. Daydreaming or dreaming at night, dreaming while you're asleep. We have emotional responses to forms. How many people have been in dreams and have been absolutely terrified of the things they've seen and experienced? Welcome to the club. It's called a nightmare. But when you wake up, you say, oh, that was just a dream. But in life, just because it has some physicality to it, these forms, doesn't mean there should necessarily be an emotional connection to it. That moment of sati when you wake up in the morning, it was just a dream. You can have that moment of sati during the day where you say it was just forms and sounds and variables and apparitions and things outside my control. Experienced it. Am I worse for the wear? No. Have I been injured? Okay, I can heal. It's about moving on to the next thing, but not necessarily expecting or wanting any type of drama. But if the drama does come, then see it as forms and sounds and sights and touches and those types of things. Well, what is reality? Then, reality is the importance we give to it, subjectively, spiritually. But if we rescind that importance, then it is not important for us. A rock fell off a cliff and crushed a grand piano you were about to play. Well, do you have to put a gigantic amount of importance into that act, or can you just see it as causality of this moving like this, being there at this time, and this happened? Can you look at it that way? If it's not your piano, it's not your rock, and you weren't going to play on it, if you were going to look at it from a third person or fourth person perspective, couldn't it even be funny? Like, this is ridiculous. This is outrageous. This is crazy. Look at this daydream world we live in, where such things can happen, and do happen all the time. How about all those gigantic, amazing technical accomplishments of ships that are now lying at the bottom of the ocean? How much work has gone into that? How many days those ships were sailing with full colors, with a jaunty fashion. And yet, look where they are now. They're not moving. Who could have predicted it? Who can predict the end of their lives? And yet we're trained to live in a smart culture, right? What is smart? All the smart people doing all the smart things ends up in something not so smart. Despite people not wanting it to end that way. And yet, going into it, how many smart people knew this is indeed a possibility? How many ships from the Roman Empire are still sailing around today? Where are their inhabitants? Where are their sailors? Where are their bones? I like the expression, we're all made of stardust, because it is true. All of the components in your body, where do you think they came from? The calcium? Where do you think they will go? Just it's a collection and then it's a scattering. It's a becoming, it's a returning. It cycles like that. Just a quick note on how the economy can and cannot work. So there's this case of which had its political system taken over more or less by Leninists. Again, we're talking bottom 5 people who knew all about it that wanted to be the top 5 and got the military means to pull that off with all the relationship baggage that goes along with that to their providers of military and other means of support, such as protecting and boosting political functionaries, throwing elections, criminal terrorism. I mean, there's a whole lot that needs to be added to those types of things happening. But sometimes in fact, oftentimes I like coming to the academic and also the scientific levels to just look what is the reality of working bad systems. So recently the information came out that their main energy provider is kicking out money to cronies to the tune of about, I believe it's $53 million a day, something like that. That's what was calculated. But because their electrical grid is failing, because they're not investing, because they're not planning, because they're a shakedown operation, and because they can't afford it, because they have to pay these people, because these people don't want to hear reasons why they're not getting their money. The cost to the economy, because there's load sharing, right? So half the day is without electricity. So imagine that. Look, think of your modern economy. Half the day, no phone calls. Well, okay, you could charge your battery. But everything that runs with electricity, maybe electric trams or digital processing, computers, whatever it is, it doesn't work half the day. So take your work day, cut it in half. Let alone like a production facility. Can you imagine trying to produce chairs or your power tools? You're trying to, if you have a factory, it's not just you, it's like 100 people. So you do need to have bigger electricity concerns because we're talking about industrialization. Industrialization allows you to do a lot more with a lot less aggravation and work and what have you. So imagine you're producing cans of soup. Those cans of soup have a lot of utility. But you do require industrialization to produce them effectively and efficiently and at scale. Then you also need to have things being able to deliver things to your facility and unload them and drive away. You need energy to do all of that. So then, of course, the economists calculate, well, what is the damage to the economy when there's these energy gaps? And he said, well, we calculate the loss to be $280 million a day to the economy at large. So there we see economic criminality, just black and white, on a daily basis in terms people can understand. So the 50 million the criminals profit by costs the country 280 million. And then just think, what is the number of people that we're talking about that lost the 280 million versus maybe 10 people, or what is it, 20 people, 30 people getting a cut of the 53 million. And there you can just see it in the most black and white terms, that it's not a winner. It's a big loser. How many times more is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 6 times more of a loss than the gain. But what makes that happen? Well, it's impunity is what makes it happen. The impunity of the 30 profiteers is what makes that black magic happen. But then you would have to ask yourself, like, how difficult would it be to figure a couple things out? But then it's a question, if you get rid of them, would another 30 come to fill their shoes? So how do you make systems, from an architectural standpoint, it's a question, how do you make systems resilient against such things happening? Because they are happening. They're modern problems. These are not the problems of ancient Mesopotamia, although I'm sure they had similar problems, which is really funny to think about. Think of them in their garb, their ancient garb, and there's some guy sitting at the water aqueduct, and he's siphoning water off the public aqueduct, something like that. People come up to him, goat herders, come on, could you please let some water flow to the city for a change? We got problems down there. And then them sticking their hand out. There could be a whole film about that happening, because this is an age-old problem. But I do feel that now that we're entering into a feedback culture, that can also scale, that it's possible that it is possible to identify problems and to solve them. And I think one of the best ways of solving this type of problem is attacking greed on a cultural level and exposing it for the pestilence that it is, the vampirism that it is. That you could even explain that to a simple person. The analogy I just gave with 50 million goes to a very few amount of people, and a very large amount of people loses 280 million a day. You can make those things these complex occurrences understandable to even simple people. And then you can also conclude, so whatever comes out of the phony baloney political machine that allows that situation to happen, they're bad too. Like, whatever they say about values, whatever they say about what they wanted to do, whatever anthropological fabrications they have that sound really rah, 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 They're frauds. They're not managing even their energy responsibly. So what can they do for you? Like, what else can they do for you? What are they going to come out with the textbooks for the kids, teach them about history, or what type of emotional or emotionalizing, jargonistic ridiculousness are they going to come up with next? Like, do you really need to care? What is it about it that you should care about, other than the philosophical principles of impunity and greed, and that you should avoid them in your personal life? You should not view these people as successful, because that's not what success looks like. It's not. Like the country before 50 million was being siphoned off today to nobody knows who, few people. Everybody was a whole lot richer and a whole lot safer, and had a whole lot more optimism, and rightfully so, for the future. So anybody claiming that the transformation was somehow justified or better, or they're part of the Blarney machine. They've been either Blarnified and are repeating, or they're a Blarneyist, and perhaps a profiteer. You would think a Blarneyist wouldn't work for free, but you would be surprised. People can get blended on emotional push button issues, no matter how ridiculous or destructive they are. So you can have a girl who's been told her father was a war criminal, when in fact he was defending the country. But that's what she's told in school in occupied territories by the authorities. So just imagine the type of mentality she then develops on the basis of that misinformation. Instead of walking barefoot to the grave and bringing flowers and kneeling down and imbibing some sense of gratitude, she despises his memory and explains loudly in shrieking, stupid, and misguided tones in any venue she feels it's socially acceptable to do so, that we should never, that she is disavowing herself of her own father to win some type of brownie points. So do these things happen? They happen. This is what you pay attention, you see, and then you see who the people doing it, and then just try to infer what lack of values they have, and how they're riding through this life with those values and those deeds behind them, those deeds in front of them, the degenerating machines that they are. So but modern neo-barbaric times, that's sort of what we're experiencing. In the 80s, you told people that this was a possibility. They might say it was possible, but it was improbable. And if you harped on upon it, they would have either treated you like a prophet, which they should have done, with some more reverence, but they could have also treated you like a complete crazy person, just because they didn't believe it was probable. So there are some people that were alive in like 1980, like they do know this is true. And then just look at the levels and layers and waves of misinformation you've gotten year after year after year after year. What was the big thing in 1983? See, somebody who was living that year, a whole year, you can't remember one dang thing, and yet what was happening in that year was pretty compelling, I'm pretty sure. And yet look at all the wrong conclusions we've been led to. So we've got wrong conclusion people riding us in the information sphere. Bad things happen, well, they're always explaining that away in some type of ideological lens that suits them. They're very concerned about public relations, which is an adjunct of propaganda, which is an adjunct of warlike actions. Misinforming the public, that's a warlike action. It's just a question of what the warlike party is. We like to think it has to be a geopolitical entity. It doesn't have to be necessarily one. The warlike action of bandits, they're more local and regional. Warlike actions of irregulars, I like that one. Start breaking down these big blocks of things you think are impossible, because they're happening. This is today. An economy will lose 50 plus million due to these causes, and 50 plus, let's add that on top, so it's 280 plus 50 million. So the economy, because you should think of the electrical grid as part of the economy. If that 50 million a day needs to be invested in creating more redundancy and more capacity, but it's not, so it's essentially being stolen. So, and then the 280 lost in economic activity. So what is that? Is that 330 million a day? So how long has that been going on? Do you think something like that will get better or worse? And why is it inevitable that it gets worse? Why? Why can't one recognize a problem and then address the problem in all of its scope, including the informational level, which has kept you from these gigantic, brutal truths that should, if your head is filled with cotton candy, should just blow it out like a hurricanic sea breeze. And that if you ever would think about speaking about such a matter that you're so misinformed about, that you would shut your mouth and never talk about something you know nothing about, as if you did. Because that's the great thing about numbers. Numbers have nothing to do with emotions. There's nothing that justifies that except greed, and greed isn't a justification. It's a rationalization that greedy people have. So just imagine all the little games they gotta play for that to not work on that level, that scale. And then getting up in the morning and being proud of yourself for doing something, contributing to that in some way. Well, what comes in handy for that? Historical tropes. Go back into a fabricated past. It's been fabricated for you that can justify that and put it in some way that you can think better about yourself for doing it. That's how they do it. Look, vulgar people look to the quick and easy vulgar solutions every time. That's what defines them. Now, whether they should be tolerated or not is quite another question. Who's tolerating what and why? They don't have much concern for the longevity of the electrical grid they're managing. What other vectors do you think they have a concern for longevity for? Except their own ride on this planet. That's it. They've reduced it down to that alone. Now this might, all the bandits listening, they're like, why are you boring us with the obvious? Well, let me tell you, everybody outside the world of banditry, This type of world is so alien to them that they wouldn't believe it existed unless the numbers indicated that it did. Because you can't fudge the numbers on every level. So it's bringing rubes up to speed on what this rubification is all about. But what will Rube do with that, about it? See, the lower rubes will say, "Oh, I want to rube the rubes." Isn't that what politics is about? I'm putting myself out here. I'm putting myself in the pipeline. I'm gonna be the deal maker. It's not about solutions. It's about deal making. So that you'll see. There's actually more of them. See, it's common, vulgaris, common. It's very common. It's not very good. So, understanding Russia as just having fallen into banditry. So, king of the bandits under him, then what do they really care about law? What do they care about the rules? The rules didn't make them bandits. They made themselves bandits. And they also rot out the core. Like, it's sort of it's a parasitical strategy. So once you take everything of value within a society, well, then you're looking outwards, or you're looking in and out, both at the same time. What can you get from others, and what can you get from the inside? And that's just sort of how they spend their day. So if it's a weaker country with more naive people that don't understand their way of seeing things, well, then they get to rook them. That's like the dummy that comes in from a wholesome place. It comes into the city, and they've been in the city for a long time. They know the city rules. They don't care about the rules of the mountains or of farms. Their city rules trump those because that's their domain. So the rules of banditry are what we're talking about, and there's not a lot of rules in banditry. Actually, there's just a lot of other things in play, a lot of other dynamics. So now one commentator said, "Well, oh, well, look, we're always inward focused. We're always, complaining about this or that. If we don't have a united front against this will take over." I agree and also don't agree with that. I think they're already inside. They've been inside for a while, so it's about reducing their influence on all levels, especially the sociological ones that break up, for example, family structures, break up morality. It makes it all a lot easier to predate on a headless, impoverished population type thing. So tying that back to the sociology and saying, well, oh wow, we had a bunch of scientists that were criminals too. Like, imagine scientists developing stuff that's bad for other people. It's really the C19 method, isn't it? Let's take normal stuff and make it even worse. Like, let's take the transmittability of it and increase it 1,000 times. That's essentially what they're doing. It's like a symbolic for what bad people do, is they make worse things. And how do they become bad people? Because they adopt bad values. The bad values lead to bad outcomes. but not necessarily for them, they think. Oftentimes it does. Many of them have this laissez-faire attitude that, I would never get shut down, I'm much too clever, the other people are stupider than me. So they have that. That's a way of seeing themselves. They have a certain irresponsibility, and they also have a certain desperation. If they don't do it, there's nothing left for them. And this, in some ways, gives some credibility to their argument, because they point out, well, what's the benefit of being a good person if you get bad results? You see? But what are bad results? Can you be a good person and still find success? Maybe being good means sticking to your principles despite being poor for some time. But these are all principles you're trying to tell to people that don't want to hear about all that. They know what being poor is like, and it's not a great thing. So whatever they need to do to get out of poverty, they're willing to give it a shot, because there are no avenues open to them which would otherwise integrate them into better systems. And so that should also be considered part of the political responsibility, is managing human resources in just such a way that young people are not predated on, and they are then funneled into useful activities. And yet, we're not just talking young people, we're talking, you have to look into your population dynamics. Are people working themselves to death? What is the concept? What is the architecture of the system? And can it be adapted into different forms? Like, how about more sustainability? More farming, more permaculture, breaking that up, less efficiency, more resiliency. And yet these are things that can only be really entertained unless there's enough executive authority to institute them, despite what some people, some minority interest, might have something against that happening. And so to get things done in this realm, it leads to a necessity of conflict. And again, not always do the good prevail. Many, many, many times bad prevail, destroy the good things, and then desertification, civic desertification sets in. 300 years later, archaeologists try to figure out what happened. Very common human cycle. Also in Europe, the Celts, pretty much nowhere to be found in modern day Germany, for example. But their mounds and other fortifications are still in certain places. So even people that are mildly different from other people can get just disappeared from the history books. So, but being a good person means being a good person also in bad times, which means not succumbing to bad times, despite all the bad things. Oh, the street was wonderful when I was growing up as a kid. Now there's drug addicts all over the place, busted out windows, shootings, random shootings. Well, that's just the way it is, right? You didn't decide that that's what should happen. You're not going to stop being a good person in bad circumstances. Now, some people get drawn into these toxic social frames. It's a big mistake for them. And I understand gullible people, that's where they go, and that the results are not good. It's foreseeable, and you wish there wasn't so many gullible people out there, but people are born gullible. So you can see how these things can happen, even if they are undesirable outcomes. But then also look between the attraction to the aversionary and the attraction to the desirable, and switch back and forth, and then disconnect those attractions or cravings to either one. Because you will say, no, I'm not attracted to the aversionary, but you are. The anger, the impulse, the drama of it attracts you to it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have looked, right? It caught your attention. There's all those other nice things going on, but no, you're here, right, with the aversionary thing. That's attraction. That has power over you. Cut that power. Catch yourself doing it. Watch your mind's mind. Be the minder of your mind. And watch it attach on to desirable things and aversionary things, and doing both, and then feeling the discrepancy between perfection and reality. Also imagined reality. It's always good to come up with a who knows every once in a while. Like, maybe you're wrong. That's what you're saying to yourself, is maybe you're seeing it in one way that might be unfavorable. You might be having a bad day, or you might be inclined to make something more aversionary than it is, to make it more dramatic, which makes it more interesting, which makes you more invested in that thing. But those are self-defeating exercises, ultimately. And a waste of time, and a waste of engagement, which is in fact causing irritation, whether you want to admit it or not. But what if I was just standing here and didn't have to scratch my elbow? That would be too boring. Well, you don't have to think of anything, but your mind is set up for that, and our culture is conditioned into that, and so you bumble into that. But you can direct your mind to anything, and it's, in the grand scheme of the universe, it's equally valuable, or equally not valuable. Pick up your glass and smash it somewhere. Nobody cares. It's just your, or what you consider to be your glass. Now you have the causality of a broken glass, whatever that means in your case. But finally, when the oceans evaporate, I don't think that incident will be considered meaningful to anyone but you. Now, perhaps a less agitating way to see what the Russians are doing is to think of it in terms of, this is what they consider to be a youthful contest, because they don't have a lot of use for useful young people, and young people are really full of spit and vinegar. They want to start now. They want to do this. They want to do that. They don't want to listen to old people, and so, if not in modern times, certainly in prehistoric times, they were the impetus behind warlike actions. The old timers, the old heads, I'm sure they advised them against it in most cases, unless they were one of a caste that was their business model. So why did they have stuff? Why did they have land? Why were they able to be on the land? Because either they or their grandfather or what have you came and settled that place in more ways than one. So if we want to get beyond the economics of it, I think it's a bad thing to say, oh, we don't have enough money to support the right type of people. I don't think that's the right way of ever putting things. And I also think it's a wrong way to say people are in it for the money because they want it, just the money. This is just, in a way, some type of larger phenomenon. And we also have to think of the now it's so easy to fall into this perception of the Russians as a one nation organization when it's not. It's multi-organizational. So they got bodies to throw at things, and they figure if it's not thrown at something, it's gonna be thrown at them. So in a way, there is a certain Asian step calculus in play that is as old as time itself. And so if we can look at all different types of things with neutrality, then why can't we look at that with a little bit of neutrality too? This is the realm of testing, right? There's all different types of people in this crazy world of ours. And there's all different types of crazy situations. How about, for example, some French company doing with bad management in Vietnam that might have been there for decades and maybe even centuries that wasn't really performing well in a social dynamic there, which put the people off from the whole idea of imperialism, just people rolling in and lording it over everyone else and treating people badly. This doesn't mean that they need to solve all their problems, but at least in a specific area. Now, I think there was a mixed bag. There were good French companies and there were bad French companies. But if at some point the mass perception becomes, and it might also be based on enemy propaganda that the system is unfair or unjust or not working, then that can also be weaponized. And it can have destructive effects. And in fact, only the people that at the top make money off of it, or people associated with the franchise, of disgruntlement, basically. So, but let's just say for propagandistic or understanding propaganda better purposes, that there was one French company that wasn't treating its workers right, somewhere with crooked family. How much do you think, as a European or a Westerner, that you would feel affinity with that person? Like, let's just basics. Let's just pretend for a second we can go back into that time and you can understand that you speak fluent French. Even if you're a Frenchman, how much of a commonality would you have with a person that's engaged in activities that are unwise? Probably very little if you're a good person. In fact, you might even feel disgust. And it's unfortunate because some of these disgust stories are the ones that got circulated, which led to a misperception of what was going on there. And then on the other hand, why not? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of countries that would love to have a large French presence from, let's say, the 1920s and before that, like the 1890s, like French society. I think some countries would wish they could put them all in a time machine and send them to their countries or invite them back, because they create nice venues, good times, good things. Now, some would say only for themselves, but that does rub off on areas. Corsica without the French would just be a pile of rocks, okay, in the Mediterranean, which some people would probably prefer because they don't get along with the French, and French are very distinct type of European people. They managed to pick fights with all of their neighbors too. Last but not least, the Germans. So all peoples don't get along with all different other peoples. Now, they came up with this term imperialism. This is, again, Lenin thought this thought. It was convenient for him to put it into this geopolitical context. And so that word is still used in Vietnam, and then they look at the past and they think, oh, because this was bad and now we're good. But look at what's happening now. What is happening now have to do with the past, really? No matter how glorious or how terrible it was. If you're living in the past, you're not living in the present. And because the past can be manipulated, and it has been, you should really be aware and do some self-analysis how much your thinking in terms of the past influences your behavior. Now, on the other hand, I understand there's also the false phenomenon of over-exaggerating how great the West is. Okay, so people come to the West, they're trying to parrot Western ways because internally they have accepted the supremacy of the West. And this isn't necessarily true. There is no utopia on earth. This is delusional. This is the other type of delusion. So as deluded as you can be in that there's a heaven on earth, you can be deluded that there's a hell or hell bringers on earth. When in fact, it's a spectrum. It's a gray area. And there's things that are better and there are things that are worse. So is it possible to live in the present and not have a negative bias towards the future? Neither being seduced by the West or the seduction of the West, nor being seduced by enmity towards the West. Blame. It's their fault. They did this. They need to pay. And it's not them anymore. See, the people get switched. The people who did stuff, they're not there. You're hitting more or less innocent people when you're attacking them based on past tropes. So how can that be good behavior? So also expecting too much. How do you become disappointed? Expect too much. Next time you go to the bus stop, expect too much of the bus. And just write down, because I know Vietnamese are very fastidious, write down everything in a notebook that is dissatisfying with high expectations versus having low expectations, or even better, no expectations. So do that experiment. 3 days, 1, 2, 3. Someone wrote back and said, my descriptions of trolls is quite intriguing, especially of the public charlatan variety. Could you go into more depth as to their characteristics, which you may know them by? I thought that was an excellent question, and it did come to mind that they look like geckos in the moment of their personal triumph of trolling. They have that grin. Take a look at geckos. Geckos are wonderful animals. They seem to have an amusing smile, almost like the Mona Lisa. It's a subtle smile and bulging eyes. There's a grin. They're grinning while they're on their pedestal of, you could say, shame in objective terms, but it's a personal triumph as far as they regard it. So that's the discrepancy. They have a serpentine look to their face. Because it is that limbic brain of ultimate vulgarity that transmits a personal sense of triumph, but it's the incongruency between performance and delivery and what is then thereby accomplished, which is ultimately a waste of time. Not just a waste of time, but an opportunity cost as well. So that's the face. But you can look at a gecko and you can also laugh at it. Geckos make all types of noises in the middle of the night. They have all types of little trolls that they engage in. So they're really magnificent animals in a way, but when they are in the wrong venue at the wrong time, it really is rather unfortunate. And yet you could just see it as a gag. Like this is a joke. It's a joke, an inside joke being played off in a serious way. They're straight manning their material. And if you have a lot of time, you could say, all right, well, but the key thing is just to have functioning mechanisms so that if it is a troll, that they never return to the venue or the organization or the corporate. It's a one and done type thing. If we have a feedback culture. And not just on basis of personality and appearance, although they'll certainly play a part in it, but just in the straight words that they spoke during the time that they had to speak, and that many of those words were misspoken. But you don't necessarily have to have a hair trigger reaction on it. Maybe it takes 3 times, 3 strikes and you're out type of rule. Unless it's a really tedious attempt with tedious vocabulary to tediously berate the audience. Then maybe one and done is enough. You don't have to wait 3 times for something like that. But on the other hand, 3 times should give you some broader indication about the sincerity or the lack thereof of some presenter of cultural balderdash. Again, it really does depend on how trivial you think your time is, or the time on this planet is for good things to happen when so many bad things are happening, and people like that are making it happen by wasting people's times and taking the time away from the real speakers. That's the way you need to see it. You need to break through the personality of them and see the personality they disposed with their gecko-like grins and pufferys. That's what's lost. So, if they triumph for an afternoon, then let them triumph, but do plan on taking appropriate actions as best you can to spare others from such ribaldus imps. It's always great to go back to what is essentially excellent historical work by people who have comprehensive understandings of doing comparisons. For example, comparing different sources. It's very, very valuable, and it's done a lot in scientific circles. It's a form of not in-house peer reviewing, but international peer reviewing. Now, of course, when we say international, it's really important to know who you're dealing with. Some nations have better values than others, and some nations that had great values can decline. And it might not be a gradual process. It might be the person in charge of the scientific department doesn't have the right values, and so values go down, or politics gets mixed up in it. We want to hear the truth. Well, the public, they don't want the public to hear the truth. And look, this is what happened in the past. I'm not talking about today, although if you hear this in the future, it's probably true to a certain extent where you are. And there's good and bad reasons. Why tell everybody everything if they don't necessarily need to know? That's also a really annoying thing that proselytizing has to it. Why do you need to convince someone that you're right? Like, what is the purpose of that? If it's what you can do is present your truthful analysis, and if it's not true, then you can make corrective suggestions. It's not about winning or losing. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a collaborative effort. And you would say this can't happen in contemporary times. That may or may not be true depending on where you are based on political realities. But let me tell you the good news. Some countries are very civilized and very relaxed, and they don't have these problems. They don't have these civilizational problems. They don't have these historical problems. They're actually doing very, 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 very well for themselves. Very well managed. Very strong social cohesion. Now, there's no paradises on earth. And these things change over time. Maybe it's the case now, but in 10 years it won't be. So making these assumptions that a country will remain civilized is naive. Just like making the assumption that countries that don't have their act together won't get their acts together. Countries can go up, countries can go down. Places can go up, places can go down. Now, when I was a jaunty young lad, traversing the globe, Mexico was just an enchanting place. Just really, I think it was half the population they have today. So there was a lot of natural habitat, at least the places where I was rolling around. Great beaches. The beer was drinkable. Now the water, you had to watch the water. It was advisable to drink bottled water or water from hotels of repute. There was the possibility of getting a chance of Montezuma's revenge, and tourists would mention it. It wasn't uncommon. But if you did take care of where you ate, and you had some luck, and what you drank, and you were well equipped, as I was apt to travel, then you had no problemo. Now, I wasn't driving through the cartel-controlled areas, although I think I did go through a couple checkpoints where they probably were present. I was just blissfully unaware of them, and looking back, it probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. And there were probably a lot better ways of doing it, but the country was just magical. They still had a strong Spanish tradition. They had great brass music, still great food. Friendly people, despite what people say. I did not run into I've never had any problems with any Mexicans at any time. And I bumped into quite a few of them in my travels through the southeast of the United States and also in other places. Always had great memories, fond memories of all the Mexicans I've ever bumped into. So, gracias, amigos. But today, what I hear is going on in that country, completely different place, transformed. It's not what it once was. There's just tremendous amounts of illicit funds have flowed into that area, and it's become militarized. They are gunned up. They got more money than the U.S. has in some parts. they're uh, they're equivalent to oil sheiks of sorts, and they've got private armies, and they got their business models, and they got their governments. They've got exploding population issues. So, different place, different time, different reality. This is the principle of change. Now, will they run off the rails? Will there be an intervention? How can an intervention be managed in a civilized way? Will it ever happen? All these open questions. Nobody has a crystal ball. But of course, everything's possible. Things can get worse, things can improve. And being around good people, doing good things, that's what improvement is all about. So, and one of the good things is solidarity, especially where common values are concerned. Very high standards that are good because they're high standards. You have steel beams that have high technical specifications and standards. They don't break. They don't rust. They are load bearing. They don't fail. That's the way you should think of values. You have the right values and the right high values. Those values can take an enormous amount of wear and tear and still work. Imagine it's fire certified too. Thing can go through the fiery furnace. You say, "Oh, steel can't be fire certified." Well, what is your barbecue grill made out of? Look at those flames. Doesn't bend. Now there's higher levels of that. Just imagine that. What do you think furnaces are made out of in some cases? What about that? So you have values that have been specified on that type of level. They will not fail. They'll slice through anything, even a gloomy and doomy future based on current realities. Your footwear is messed up, you just fell down a mountainside, you're half conscious, maybe you've lost some bodily fluids. That's your starting point. You can patch yourself together, you can repair your kit. You can, in the future, avoid pitfalls that you otherwise would have fallen down, such as blind rage. Like how they say blind rage, it's blind. Rage blinds you. Ever see a boxer go into a rage? He just wants to knock the other guy out. He doesn't see the hits coming, especially one that then knocks him out. But he was a really tough dude, a really mean dude, but he fell into a rage, didn't he? That was a misstep, and it's a causality he wasn't able to get under control. And so we got even worse hit, which probably made him even more enraged, but at some point he lost the physical capacity to continue the fight. And so what did his rage help him or bring him? Now when he comes back to consciousness, he can come back to a pure consciousness of neutrality and not allow himself to be consumed by rage again. He can chalk it up to experience of the young, the naive, the untested, the vulgarly common and natural emotions one can feel in certain situations. But one can also then depersonalize whatever event one experienced it and see it in terms of abstract principles that do have causality to them. Such as, why do we call it a defilement? Look, if you pick up a defilement, you should smell it. It smells bad, you see. So defilements come from bad places and produce bad things. And they do sting. And they have been identified, at least the three chief ones. 3 simple things to look for. Yet the one thing to look for is illusion, deception itself. So it doesn't want that the other 2 things get seen, which are greed and ill will, irritation and rage, anger and hate. So even if you identify the easiest 2, seeing those 2, that's where the third one gets in the way. That's why it's difficult. Say, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to see through illusion. That's what you say? That is an illusion. That's the illusion of the illusion. You're thinking that you can see through things. I think it's great when these analysts that are trying to be on top of interpreting everyday events get it wrong. They get it wrong in real time, and they get it wrong weeks and months and years ago. Like looking back, they get it wrong. Like they get the analysis, the post-analysis wrong. And these are experts. These are professionals. These are considered to be the best trained and best capable, best paid minds on this planet. And they get it wrong. So what type of life does the normal, common, vulgarly common, normal person live, do you think, in terms of insight, wisdom, and enlightenment? Is it the life of Padujana? Is that what they're called? Stuck in circular conditioned activities that are unwholesome, unwise, repetitive mistakes, repetitive irritations. Purely of a psychological variety. I'm not talking about real irritations, real pain, although yogis can ascend that too with their practice. Some of them have, at least, they say. These are not miracles, these are skills. But don't be too fast to think you see through illusion, because where your eyes go and your mind goes, illusion goes with you. So the person that will persecute, for example, a good person, they think they have the right reason for doing it, but they don't. Which leads them to exercise ill will. And the result of that is causically descending results, internally and externally. Diminished people produce diminishing results, carried over into the infinity of future lives. Where will they be heading, do you think? And we must consider a human birth the most fortunate birth, because it teaches these principles, but not everybody get them before they die. And some of them take away from this place the worst principles, and the worst of results are the result not just for them, but for others, that are also causally linked to one person or another, or a causal event. And yet chance and out of controlness are two of the main principles that determine the reality of our existence. Even if we deludedly like to think otherwise. Oh, no, I'm a very established member of society. I'm very well respected, and I've done very many valuable... Oh, really? Is that true? Or is that the story you tell yourself? Or is it just the story you tell others for the sake of personal aggrandizement, perhaps? For gassing out into bigger shape? This is also why I like to come back to somebody like George Washington. George Washington was a good example of a leader that put in his time, and then he was expecting the system to work. You could say that was a naive, but maybe he didn't truly believe it, and maybe his age finally factored into it. But I am glad that he did retire and have a few great years that he could devote to more wholesome things, such as gardening or horseback riding or whatever he did. Now, in that sense, you could say he had supernormal type of nobility. That is something that is rare, but it is, when you have it in a leader, that's exactly what you should be looking for. Not somebody who wants to turn it into a lifelong gig. Just imagine these crappy music bands, like one of them throws themselves together, and then they dominate the music scene for 40 years playing crappy music. That's sort of the equivalent of these political groups that play to themselves and their group of cronies and create a gigantic opportunity cost for the venue that is supporting their meteoric rise, their infamous meteoric rise to venue capture, genre capture. It's tragic. And yet, if you think of them that way, that's what it is. They're bands, they're brands. They brand themselves. So they are looking for new ideas. They're looking to repackage things, but they're not looking to change any type of fundamentals that they profit off of. That's just not their business model. So, but the good news is they're recognizable. You don't need, good people don't need to go to bad people, and that's why their system's a trophy. But unfortunately, when they're tied to larger social frameworks, such as nations, then you get a lot of innocent victims in the thrown into the mix of mismanagement. I think one of the primary assumptions that modern democracies have, which is false, is that good people will feel forced to go into politics. That's not always the case. That's a really strange assumption. And the people that do decide to go into politics then do that because there's some type of crisis, but the crisis itself makes the problem-solving process remote, because the first problem is there's a lot of crazy people trying to capitalize on a lot of different crazy things, and a lot of them are not even close to being authentic. It's basically trolling for attention. But one thing I know is that new people come in, old people go out. So that type of change dynamic can work for you at certain times. It can also work against you. The other thing is people often assume way too much from political organizations. Like, politics can't solve all of your problems. So you get a bunch of crazy people that would have had a lot of problems anyway, and then things get tough and they get even more problems. These people, they're expecting way too much of their leadership when they themselves are leaderless. They don't have an internal leader. They're looking for a leader to lead them to things like basic survival because they didn't figure that one out just yet. But if they get set up as a community organizer or something like that, then at least they're able to buy groceries and get up and talk some talking points that conform to someone else's regime of political filler, because it's not about rocking any boats. It's just about collecting taxes and from a diminishing tax base and kicking the can down the road in whatever limited capacity they are for whatever limited time they have in office. In some parts of the world, that's normal, right? To somebody's like, "What are you talking about? There's nothing wrong. That's our system." But on the other hand, there's way different ways of doing things that are a whole lot better. But they do require better people to do them, not just the thinkers, the theoreticians, the philosophers, the geniuses, the poets, the kings.